What if the knee pain you've been blaming on age alone is actually being caused by a handful of small, repetitive habits you've never once connected to your walk? Most people over 50 who develop knee discomfort assume it's simply wear and tear catching up with them, an inevitable part of getting older that walking either helps or hurts in some vague, general way. But there are 5 specific habits, each one common, each one easy to overlook, that place very particular, repeated stress on your knee joint in ways that have nothing to do with your shoes, your walking surface, or how far you walk. These are habits about how your knee moves, what you carry, where you walk, and how you prepare, and they quietly compound over months and years until they show up as pain you can no longer ignore. So today we're going to walk through these 5 specific habits, exactly why each one places targeted, unnecessary stress on your knee joint, and precisely how to correct each one starting with your very next walk. Before we begin, remember this video is for education only. If you're experiencing swelling, locking, a sense of your knee giving way, or pain that persists at rest, please speak with your doctor, since these symptoms deserve direct evaluation rather than a general video alone. Now let's begin. Most people ask, why do my knees hurt when I walk? But that's actually too broad a question to answer usefully because knee discomfort during walking can stem from dozens of distinct mechanical causes, many of which have nothing to do with the walk itself and everything to do with habits happening before, during, or entirely separate from the walking motion. The better question is, what specific, repeated mechanical patterns am I placing on my knee joint that I've never consciously examined? Because your knee joint responds to cumulative, repeated stress far more than to any single walk, meaning a habit that seems entirely unrelated to your knees, like which shoulder you carry your bag on, can meaningfully contribute to knee discomfort over months of repetition, even though the connection isn't obvious in the moment. Here is why these particular 5 habits become more consequential after 50 specifically. Cartilage, the smooth, cushioning tissue lining your knee joint, naturally thins somewhat with age and has a reduced capacity to repair itself compared to earlier decades of life, meaning repeated, uneven stress that your knee could absorb and recover from easily at 30 may accumulate into genuine discomfort and wear by 50 or 60. The stabilizing muscles and connective tissue surrounding your knee also tend to lose some strength and elasticity with age, reducing your knee's natural buffer against exactly the kind of repeated mechanical stress these 5 habits produce. And because many of these habits are things you do every single day, sometimes multiple times a day, the cumulative repetition involved means even a small, seemingly insignificant mechanical stress adds up considerably faster than most people realize. Think of your knee joint like a door hinge that's expected to open and close thousands of times without maintenance issues, as long as the door itself hangs evenly and swings straight. But if something causes that door to consistently swing slightly off-center, whether a warped frame, an unevenly distributed weight on the door itself, or a hinge that's never been given a moment to settle before being forced into rapid motion, the hinge wears unevenly and far faster than it would under normal, balanced use. Your knee joint depends on a similarly even, balanced pattern of use to remain comfortable over years of repeated motion, and the 5 habits we're discussing today each introduce a specific, avoidable form of unevenness into that pattern. Let's start with the first habit, and one that surprises many people the first time they hear about it: locking or fully hyperextending your knee at the top of each step. This happens when, as your leg swings forward and your foot plants, you allow your knee to straighten completely and lock into a fully extended, rigid position, sometimes even bending slightly backward beyond straight, rather than maintaining a small, natural amount of softness in the joint throughout your stride. Many people develop this habit without ever noticing it, sometimes because it feels stable in the moment, since a locked knee joint does provide a brief sensation of solid support. However, a fully locked or hyperextended knee transfers the impact and stress of each step directly through the joint itself and the ligaments that stabilize it, rather than allowing your surrounding thigh muscles to absorb and distribute that impact, the way a slightly softened, unlocked knee is designed to do. Over thousands of repetitions during a typical walk, and over months and years of consistent walking, this pattern can contribute to increased strain on the ligaments behind the knee and accelerated wear on the cartilage, since the joint is essentially absorbing forces it wasn't designed to bear directly and repeatedly. The fix involves consciously maintaining a very slight, almost imperceptible bend in your knee throughout your stride, never allowing it to fully lock or hyperextend, which you can practice by paying attention specifically to the moment your foot plants during a walk, checking that your knee maintains just a small amount of natural softness rather than snapping into a fully rigid, straight position. The second habit involves consistently carrying a bag, purse, or shoulder bag on the same side of your body every single time you walk, without ever alternating sides or distributing that weight more evenly. Many people have a strongly preferred side for carrying a bag, often without ever consciously choosing that preference, simply defaulting to whichever shoulder feels most natural or comfortable. However, consistently carrying weight on one side of your body meaningfully shifts your center of gravity and alters how evenly your weight distributes across both legs during walking, placing more repeated load on the knee of the side carrying that consistent weight, or in some cases on the opposite knee as your body unconsciously compensates for the imbalance. Over years of consistently carrying a bag on the same shoulder, this asymmetrical loading pattern can contribute to uneven wear between your two knees, sometimes explaining why discomfort seems to develop more prominently on one side rather than both knees equally, a pattern many people assume must have some more complicated underlying cause without ever considering their bag-carrying habit as a contributing factor. The fix involves consciously alternating which shoulder or side you carry a bag on, switching sides periodically throughout the day or on alternating days entirely, or better yet, switching to a properly fitted backpack that distributes weight evenly across both shoulders and your entire back, rather than concentrating that weight asymmetrically on one side of your body. The third habit involves consistently walking on the same side of a cambered or sloped surface, such as the outer edge of a road that slopes downward toward a curb or gutter for drainage purposes, without ever varying your route or the direction you walk along that same path. Many walking routes, particularly along residential streets, include a subtle but genuine slope, called a camber, built intentionally into the road's design to allow water to drain properly. If you consistently walk the same direction along the same stretch of road, day after day, one leg is repeatedly landing on slightly lower ground than the other with every single step, creating a subtle but consistent functional leg length difference throughout that portion of your walk. Over months and years of walking the same cambered surface in the same direction repeatedly, this consistent, asymmetrical loading pattern can contribute to uneven stress between your two knees and hips, similar in principle to the asymmetrical bag-carrying habit already discussed, but originating from your environment rather than something you're actively carrying. The fix involves varying your walking route when possible, alternating the direction you walk along a particular cambered street on different days, or when consistently walking a specific route with a noticeable camber is genuinely unavoidable, being mindful to periodically switch which side of the street you walk on, rather than always favoring the same side throughout your entire walking history. The fourth habit involves skipping a proper warm-up before beginning a walk, heading straight from sitting or standing still directly into your full walking pace without any brief period of gentler movement to prepare your knee joint and surrounding muscles first. This has become an increasingly common habit as walking is often treated as a low-intensity activity that doesn't seem to require the same warm-up consideration people might give to more vigorous exercise. However, your knee joint relies on synovial fluid, a natural lubricant within the joint, to reduce friction and support smooth movement, and this fluid becomes somewhat more viscous, or thicker and less freely circulating, after periods of stillness, particularly first thing in the morning or after extended sitting. Jumping directly into a full walking pace without allowing a few minutes for this fluid to circulate more freely, and for your surrounding muscles to gradually warm and become more pliable means your knee joint is being asked to perform at full demand before it's genuinely prepared to do so smoothly, a pattern that, repeated consistently over months and years, can contribute to increased joint stress and discomfort that might otherwise be avoided with a brief, simple warm-up period. The fix involves spending 3 to 5 minutes at a noticeably slower, gentler pace at the very start of every walk, allowing your knee joint and surrounding muscles a genuine chance to warm and prepare before gradually increasing to your normal walking pace. Now let's talk about the fifth and final habit, and this one involves tight hip flexors, the muscles at the front of your hip that connect your thigh to your pelvis, a tightness that develops gradually in people who spend significant portions of their day sitting, whether at a desk, in a car, or in a favorite chair. Many people don't immediately connect hip flexor tightness to knee discomfort, since the hip and knee can feel like entirely separate joints, but they function as part of a single, interconnected mechanical chain during walking. When your hip flexors are chronically tight, they restrict your hip's full range of motion during each stride, which often causes your body to compensate by altering how your knee moves and bears weight during that same stride, sometimes producing a subtle but repeated rotational or uneven loading pattern through the knee joint as it attempts to compensate for the hip's restricted movement. Over months and years of walking with this compensatory pattern, driven by hip flexor tightness that itself originated from hours of daily sitting, the knee can develop discomfort that seems entirely disconnected from its actual root cause, since the knee itself may show no direct signs of injury or overuse, simply reflecting the downstream effect of restricted hip movement above it. The fix involves incorporating a simple hip flexor stretch into your daily routine, such as a gentle standing or kneeling lunge position held for 20 to 30 seconds on each side, ideally performed daily, particularly for anyone who spends several hours sitting throughout a typical day, helping to restore more complete hip mobility and reducing the compensatory strain this restriction can place on your knee joint during walking. Now, before we go further, let's debunk a few common myths about knee pain and walking habits specifically. For years, many people believed that knee pain during or after walking must always originate from something happening directly within the knee joint itself, rather than considering habits or restrictions elsewhere in the body that indirectly affect knee mechanics. Some believed that carrying a bag or backpack has no meaningful connection to joint health, since the weight involved seems too modest to matter over time. Some believed that a fully straightened, locked knee represents good, stable posture during walking, rather than recognizing the added joint stress this pattern can produce. And some believed that warming up is only relevant for more vigorous forms of exercise, not something applicable to a lower intensity activity like walking. But when we look at the actual mechanics involved, the picture becomes considerably more interconnected than a simple knee-only explanation would suggest. The real questions are not simply, does my knee itself feel injured, or has something specific happened directly to the joint? The better questions are, am I locking my knee fully with each step rather than maintaining a small, natural softness? Am I consistently loading one side of my body more than the other, whether through how I carry a bag or the specific route I walk? Am I giving my joint a few minutes to prepare before jumping into a full walking pace? And are tight hip flexors from hours of daily sitting quietly altering how my knee moves during each stride? These questions look beyond the knee itself, recognizing that knee discomfort often originates from patterns and habits located elsewhere in your daily routine. Now let's build a simple, practical framework you can use to correct these 5 habits starting with your very next walk. First, consciously check that your knee maintains a small, natural softness at the top of each step, never locking or hyperextending fully straight. Second, if you carry a bag or purse, alternate which side you carry it on, or switch to a backpack that distributes weight evenly across both shoulders. Third, vary your walking route when possible, or periodically switch which side of a consistently cambered street you walk on, rather than always favoring the same side. Fourth, spend 3 to 5 minutes at a gentler pace at the start of every walk before building up to your normal speed, giving your knee joints natural lubrication and surrounding muscles time to properly prepare. Fifth, incorporate a simple hip flexor stretch into your daily routine, particularly if you spend significant hours sitting, helping to restore hip mobility and reduce compensatory strain on your knee. Let's talk a bit more about how to actually notice whether the knee locking habit applies to you, since it can be genuinely difficult to feel from the inside while you're walking at your normal, automatic pace. One practical way to check is to slow your walking pace deliberately and pay close attention to the sensation in your knee at the exact moment your foot lands and your leg reaches its most extended position during each stride, noticing whether it feels like your knee snaps into a fully rigid, straight position or maintains a small amount of give and softness throughout. Alternatively, watching a short video of yourself walking, filmed from the side, can make this pattern considerably easier to identify visually than trying to feel for it internally while you're focused on the broader experience of walking itself. It's also worth mentioning how to identify whether the cambered road habit specifically applies to your regular walking route, since this requires a bit more conscious observation than some of the other habits discussed today. Take a moment on your next walk to genuinely notice the slope of the road or sidewalk beneath your feet, particularly if you tend to walk the same route repeatedly, and consider whether you consistently favor one side, whether out of habit, convenience, or simply never having considered varying your position. If you notice a genuine, consistent slope on your regular route, this is worth factoring into your route planning going forward, even if it means occasionally choosing a flatter, less convenient alternative specifically to avoid weeks and months of consistently asymmetrical loading. Let's talk a bit more about how to check whether hip flexor tightness genuinely applies to your particular situation, since this is another habit that can be difficult to notice directly without a specific way to test for it. A simple at-home check involves lying on your back near the edge of a bed or sturdy table, pulling one knee gently toward your chest while allowing your other leg to hang naturally off the edge. If that hanging leg's thigh doesn't rest flat and level, but instead lifts noticeably upward off the surface, this suggests some degree of hip flexor tightness on that side, since a fully relaxed, flexible hip flexor should allow that leg to hang comfortably level rather than being pulled upward by tightness in the muscle. This simple check, performed on both sides, can help you identify whether this particular habit is genuinely relevant to your situation, and whether one side shows more tightness than the other, which can sometimes correlate with which knee tends to experience more discomfort during walking. It's also worth mentioning how the knee locking habit specifically tends to interact with walking on any kind of incline, whether outdoors on a gently sloped path or on a treadmill set to an incline setting. Many people who have developed a habit of locking their knee on flat ground unconsciously adjust and maintain a more naturally bent, unlocked knee when walking uphill, simply because the incline itself makes full knee extension considerably more difficult to achieve with each step. This means some people who struggle to consciously feel or correct the knee locking habit on flat, level ground find it genuinely easier to first practice and internalize the sensation of a properly softened knee while walking on a slight incline, where the terrain itself naturally discourages full locking, before gradually applying that same awareness and muscle memory back to their regular walking on flat surfaces. Let's also briefly address when it makes sense to involve a physical therapist directly, rather than relying solely on self-directed adjustments based on general guidance like today's video. If you've made a genuine, consistent effort to address these 5 habits over several weeks and are still experiencing persistent knee discomfort, or if you're uncertain whether you're correctly identifying and correcting these patterns on your own, a physical therapist can conduct a direct, hands-on gait assessment, observing your specific walking pattern in person and identifying precisely which of these habits, or potentially other patterns not covered in today's general overview, are most relevant to your individual knee discomfort, providing a level of personalized precision that a general video, however thorough, simply cannot replicate for your specific body and walking pattern or existing cartilage wear, and are wondering whether these 5 habits are still relevant to address, given that some degree of joint change has already occurred. Correcting these habits remains genuinely worthwhile even with existing joint changes, since reducing ongoing, avoidable mechanical stress can help slow further progression and reduce discomfort, even in a joint that already shows some degree of wear. In fact, these 5 specific adjustments may be even more relevant and impactful for someone managing existing knee changes, since a joint with reduced cartilage cushioning has less margin to comfortably absorb the kind of repeated, avoidable stress these habits produce, compared to a joint with fuller, healthier cartilage reserves. And what about people who recognize several of these habits in their own routine but aren't currently experiencing any knee discomfort at all? Since several of these habits, particularly asymmetrical loading from bag carrying or cambered roads, and the cumulative effect of skipping warm-ups, tend to produce their effects gradually over years rather than producing immediate, noticeable symptoms, addressing them proactively, even in the complete absence of current discomfort, represents a genuinely valuable form of prevention, helping to preserve comfortable, pain-free knee function for many more years of walking ahead, rather than waiting until discomfort has already developed to begin making these adjustments. Let's also briefly address how these 5 habits sometimes compound with each other, since they don't necessarily operate in complete isolation. Someone who both consistently carries a bag on the same shoulder and consistently walks the same cambered route in the same direction is essentially stacking 2 separate sources of asymmetrical loading on top of each other, potentially accelerating uneven wear more significantly than either habit alone would produce. Similarly, someone with tight hip flexors from prolonged daily sitting who also skips their warm-up before walking is asking an already restricted hip and an unprepared knee joint to immediately perform at full walking demand, a combination that places compounded, rather than simply additive, stress on the knee. Recognizing which of these 5 habits might be stacking together in your own particular routine can help you prioritize which adjustments to tackle first for the most meaningful, immediate benefit. Now let's summarize everything in a simple way. 5 specific walking habits that can silently contribute to knee discomfort after 50 include locking or hyperextending your knee fully straight with each step rather than maintaining a small, natural softness. Consistently carrying a bag or purse on the same shoulder without ever alternating sides. Walking the same cambered or sloped route in the same direction repeatedly, creating a subtle but consistent asymmetrical loading pattern. Skipping a proper warm-up period before jumping directly into your full walking pace. And tight hip flexors from hours of daily sitting that quietly alter how your knee moves and bears weight during each stride. None of these habits involve the knee joint's cartilage or ligaments being directly damaged by walking itself. Instead, each represents a specific repeated mechanical pattern, whether in how you move, what you carry, where you walk, or how you prepare, that places avoidable, uneven stress on your knee joint over months and years of consistent repetition. But remember, the goal here is not to feel that walking itself is somehow dangerous or something to approach with excessive caution and analysis. Walking remains one of the most beneficial, accessible activities available to adults over 50, supporting your heart, your mood, your balance, and your independence. The goal is simply to recognize these 5 specific correctable habits so that walking continues supporting your body fully, without these small, overlooked patterns quietly working against your knees in the background. So on your next walk, choose just one of these 5 habits to focus on first, whether it's consciously softening your knee at the top of each step, switching which shoulder carries your bag, or taking a few extra minutes to warm up gently before building to your normal pace. Practice that single adjustment consistently for the next week or 2, then add another from today's list as the first begins to feel more natural and automatic. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 5 habits did you recognize in your own routine, and have you noticed any pattern of discomfort favoring one knee over the other that might connect back to one of these habits? Share your experience in the comments below. Your story may help someone else watching this video identify a pattern in their own walk they'd never considered before. If this video helped you, please like, subscribe to Nutri, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more simple, practical health strategies for adults over 50. And next, watch our video on what happens to your brain when you eat salmon twice a week after 50, because protecting your body, whether it's your knees or your mind, often comes down to small, consistent habits most people never think to examine.